are talking about materialism, the idea that our mental life emerges from our physical brain. If you are listening closely, if you are thinking about this, I hope you acknowledge that this is odd and unnatural wife. I don't expect you to believe it, at least not at first. And in fact, for the most part, people are far more attracted to the doctrine called dualism. Dualism is an idea that's been found in just about every religion and every philosophy. It's made explicit in Plato, for instance. But I think the most thoughtful and articulate defender of dualism was a philosopher, René Descartes. René Descartes believed that animals were material things. He thought the doctrine of materialism was correct about non-human animals. But humans are different, Descartes argued. For humans, there is duality. We are composed of two-thirds of things. We're in part material, but we're also in part spiritual, separate, mental, psychological, in some way that doesn't reduce to the mental. He made two arguments for this. First argument for non-material nature is that humans are capable of doing things that no machine, no material entity ever could. So it might surprise you to hear this, but Descartes in 17th century was familiar with robots. He knew about the French Royal Gardens, which is like a 17th century Disneyland on Euro Disney, which had robots that react when you approach them or when you step on certain stones. For instance, you might approach Diana and when Neptune would jump out from the bushes holding a trident. This was done not for electricity but with water. So Descartes knew about the robots and Descartes asked, well, maybe we're such things. Maybe we're just machine responding to the environment. And he said that we can't be. He said maybe animals, non-human animals can be, but human behavior is far more complicated and variegated and substituted to explain in such simple ways. His second argument is probably better now, and it based on intuition. And his claim was we don't feel like bodies. So to put it more technically, he applied that was called a method of doubt. He asked the question, what do we know for sure and what can we question? So, for instance, you might believe you were born in such and so place. You could be wrong, you could be deceived. You might believe that the earth is 1,000 or million years old. But maybe the earth created 100 years ago and all memories that our grandparents have of the past were just manufactured. You might believe, said Descartes, that your life and world are things, that you're sitting in a chair or there's a wall in front of you or there's a computer near your hands. But Descartes observed that they often believed such things that were in dreams, but weren't mistaken. He observed the people who are mentally ill or were degraded of some way might have such beliefs but don't be mistaken. So you could be wrong that there is a physical world around you. You could be wrong that where is body that you have. This is innocent concern, of course, but it's best articulated in the movie. Another version is of that we're brains in a vat. If you were a brain, just the brain sitting in a vat with electrical wires simulating your experiences, you couldn't help. Maybe you're such things. Modern-day philosophers, for instance, will argue that there's an extant chance that we're simulations, we're computer simulations. So Descartes and people following Descartes said, there's a lot we can't be sure of. The things that you are seemingly most confident about the real world can be shaken. But Descartes says, there's one thing you can't doubt. You can't doubt your own constitutions. You can't doubt your own existences. Descartes wrote, I knew that I was a substance, the whole essence or nature of which to think, and that for existence there is no need of any place, nor does it depend as material thing. This is no say. The soul by which I am that I am is entirely distinct from body. So that's a philosophical case from dualism. But as I said, dualism is also a marriage out of common sense. Think about how you describe your body. You describe your body if you profess it. My arm, my heart, my body, my brain, as if it's something separate from you that you have. Of consider your institute about personal identity. So typical as people age, their concisions follow their body. So I get 10 years old, my mind 10 years old, my brain is 10 years old. It all connected together, but we easily accept the less infection that people can hope from one body to another. There are many comments that involve body switching, body swamp. We don't walk out theory and say, I am totally confused that happened there. Rather, at last, with a near conception of the self, we accept the last of the possibility that you can hope from the body to another. None of this is limited of modern day movies. The most famous short story of history by Franz Kafka begins with a sentence: as Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. Metamorphosis involves that transformation, and long before that in Isis the characters are transformed. Some of the characters are transformed by an evil witch into pigs. It's none of you took to people and turned them into pigs, rather it's much worse. They put them in the body of pigs. As the passage goes, they had the head and voice and bristles and body of swine, but their minds remained unclenched as before, so they were penned their whipping. Our conception that body and cells are separated allows us to accept the idea that had many people inhabiting one body. This is how many people think about multiple personality disorder, something we'll get to quite later on the course. It's also at the root and wife that many people, both religious and non-religious, hold, which is the idea of demonic possessions. Your body can be taken over by somebody else. Another manifestation of dualism is you could believe in intelligent beings without bodies. If mind and body are separate, it raises the possibility you could have one without the other. Plainly, you got to have bodies without minds. That's what the course is, but the argument does you could also have minds without bodies. This is, for instance, what many people think about gods and angels. In fact, if you ask most people, religious and non-religious, that will happen after your body is destroyed, the answer is not, well, I am dead then, that's it. It's the end of things, but rather the believer is that you can live in. Maybe you end up in some spirit world, maybe you will ascend to heaven. If you're unlucky, maybe will descend to hell. Maybe you'll occupy some other body as an reincarnation. But the idea is that the destruction of your body need to be the destruction of your, because you're not your body. All the beliefs about personal identity, the beliefs about life after death, about the existence of supernatural beings. About God, all rests at last to some extent on a dualism perspective. So, materialism, which says dualism is just plain wrong, is a education wife and should be treated as such. You shouldn't just struck and write it down. You should grapple with it. You should worry about it. You should either be gradually accept of things against it. One is that it simply doesn't help us explain certain things that need to be explained. Appealing to an immaterial world, to an immaterial soul, seems to duck certain questions that really do deserve an answer. So, throughout this course, we'll ask questions like how we do learn language, what do we find sexually attractive, how does memory work. There are questions about ourselves, about our mind, to say, oh, it's all happens some immaterial realm. The second concern is that the time Descartes was correct to infer from the limitations of material things, psychical things, that we probably are not psychical things. But by now we have a much better understanding that physical things can do, which make it entirely possibly for many of us that were sad thing. So I'm thinking, for instance, of computers and robots. The final consideration is that there's Temedo's advice that the brain is in fact the robust of mental life. So put aside and psychological abstract arguments, there's just tons of direct evidence that coffee and alcohol can inflame the positions. It's just so evident in everyday life that it's psychical events that affect the brain can affect ourselves, suggesting that at the very least your mental life is intimately connected to the brain. Over recent years, something else has happened, which is very development technologies that allow us to look differently into the brain. Look at the brain's activations and infant from patterns of the brain activation that people are thinking. So very gradually you can put somebody in the scanner, and fMRI scanner, you could tell whether or not are thinking about language or music or sex. The technology is increasing. This is such point that is no impossible that for some of you, by the time you're listening to this, we can put a listening person under a fMRI scanner, and from neural patterns of neural things, you know that they're dreaming. All of things, I think, is very difficult to keep this in mind and hold on the wave of dualism. I think materialism, however uncomfortable